Are your grandparents still alive? If they died today, would you miss them? My own grandfather died 4 days ago, it most likely being the biggest surprise of my life. Yes, people die, but I hadn't even known of his existence until that Monday evening phone call. John Walker? Yeah? I'm afraid I have some bad news. The caller, my grandfather's lawyer, went on to inform me of multiple family details I hadn't known. First, I had a grandfather named William. Second, he had died by suicide, a self-inflicted gunshot wound. And third, I was to be the sole beneficiary in his will, contingent on only one fulfillment. Which is? I asked. There was a slight hesitation on the other end before she continued. It would be better if I explained in person. Could you come by tomorrow? I hung up the phone and tried to get some rest before my drive through the mountains. The strange new information swirling around in my mind like glitter in a snow globe before finally falling gently to the ground below. Having been adopted as a child, I had never known any of my real family. Maybe it's better that way. Despite finding out about the life and death of a man I had never known, I slept well that night. The next morning, after checking the weather forecast, I quickly replaced the front windshield wipers and headed north. While he had lived surprisingly close, all things considered, the drive would still take nearly 6 hours, and the upper part of the state was due for the first snowstorm of the year. Part of me was looking forward to seeing the area again, my last experience with a white substance being 15 or more years ago, growing up with a family that had taken me in. The drive started with rain at first, a slow plop for 5 or so minutes, and then a steady plastering of the windshield. 2 hours or so later after that, the snow began to fall. By the time I reached the lawyer's office, there was nearly 6 inches on the ground already, and I was in a bit of a rush to try and make it back downstate before getting snowed in completely. Hello. You must be John. I'm Cindy. She would have been stunningly beautiful under any other circumstance, her dark hair falling perfectly across her face, and a pair of the darkest green eyes I had ever seen staring back at me as she extended her hand forward. Hello, Cindy. I used the phrase, under any other circumstance, because, well, not only did the untimely death of a family member, if you could call him that, spoil the moment, the woman seemed completely devoid of any emotion, almost like a doll. It's hard to describe, and I fear I cannot do Cindy justice. Perhaps all you need to know is that there was something not quite right about my grandfather's lawyer. She was too perfect, if there is such a thing. After going over the finer details of his estate, Cindy quickly got to the caveat. It is all to be yours. The mansion in Grang Hills, his collection of old automobiles valued at $500,000, and a large property in upstate New York. It is all to be yours based on one condition. The woman paused for a moment, pretending to sort through a small stack of papers while she eyed me over. You have to send his ashes into space. Can you repeat that? Yes. He wished for you to release his remains into space. Don't worry. The details have been meticulously arranged. The woman smiled for the first time, a painfully transparent act. Physically, her smile should have been beautiful, yet that same word seemed to jump up in my mind. Unnatural. We discussed the meticulous details for a few minutes, at the end of which she handed me a single key. It unlocks every door in his home, save for one, she said. Curious now, I asked, which door doesn't it unlock? Her eyes met mine, and then drifted down towards the expensive tile underneath our feet. All but one. she repeated. Did I think that was odd? Yes, but part of me just wanted to get this whole thing over with. I didn't give a damn about the grandfather I never knew, the man that hadn't cared enough to ever contact me while he was alive, and I was planning on selling the property and possessions as quickly as possible. The subsequent drive was an hour or so north through a mix of country roads, mountains, and forest as far as the eye could see. It was evening when I finally passed over the bridge, a small sign to the right of it, Graying Hills. At the bridge's end, the road began to slant steeply upwards, so much so, in fact, that I could see the very tip of a mountain that stood in the very center of town. As I worked my way around the twisting roads, the snow began to fall thicker than it had been before. The weather was odd in itself, and I couldn't remember ever seeing snow fade for a few moments and then become a violent storm the next. It was almost as if Graying Hills was its own world apart from the one I'd known. But that was silly. Surely the odd series of twisting roads and foreboding hills were to blame for the rare weather conditions that forced their way against me as I drove upwards. Jesus, how long does it take to reach the top? I noted the time on the dash, 11:27, almost midnight. What happened next was unlike me, to say the least. That as I finally reached the top of the mountain and noted that the clock read exactly midnight, I felt a feeling of dread. I was not religious. I was not superstitious. Yet the feeling had been unmistakable. Midnight. I turned the ignition off with a click, opened the door, and set my feet onto the cold ground. It felt almost familiar, but that was impossible. It was hard to see anything in such darkness, but the top of the mountain seemed far larger than it had looked from afar. A mile in diameter? Maybe more. I would explore in the morning. For now, I just wanted to get some rest. Walking up to the old 2-story home, I found the old key my grandfather's lawyer had given me and turned it clockwise until hearing a click. The door opened easily, creaking softly and showing nothing at first glance. I flicked on the phone's flashlight and stepped into the entryway. A chandelier hung far above me as I scanned the home. It seemed pristine, almost untouched. There was a large stairway leading upwards, where I had been informed there were 2 guest bedrooms, and directly ahead of me sat a long hallway to which I seemed unable to see its ending. I placed my hand on the banister and climbed upwards for the last time that evening. Opening the blue and gold door handle to the first room, I was pleased to find a comfortable enough looking bed. The room connected to an old antique bathroom as well, with an artfully tiled floor and a cast iron bathtub that looked as if it could survive a nuclear blast. I was too tired to explore any farther. I slept. I'm not sure how much time passed when something warm brushed up against the side of my face. I let out a scream that could have woken the dead. Luckily for me, it didn't. The dead stayed that way. For now, at least. Whatever the hell it was, I swatted it quickly away from my face and jumped out the opposite side of the bed. Fumbling desperately to find the switch to the lamp, I finally flicked it on and saw, to my surprise and relief, a jovial orange cat. Jesus, you scared the shit out of me. The cat's soft green eyes stared back into mine, as if to say, that scared you. You ain't seen nothing yet. Walking over, I gently stroked the top of his head, to which a soft purr was my reply. After that, I got back into bed and tried to drift back to sleep. I did finally do just that, and this time I dreamt. I dreamt of a lake so still and calm that it seemed you could almost walk across it. I dreamt of the orange cat, and the balloon my grandfather had demanded I do my part in sending into space. In the dream, I walked past the water and towards the bright object. In the dream, the balloon wasn't red or blue or green. It didn't have the normal happy enough design you might expect on such an object. My hand reached out towards a single silver post the balloon had been attached to by a rope. Without thinking, I untied it. Without hesitation, the object floated happily up towards a sky filled with clouds. It was then that I finally realized what had been painted on the outside of the thing. But it wasn't painted exactly, was it? There was a face of an old man, his bright blue eyes staring across the distance between us. The man grinned widely as if pleased, as the balloon lifted farther and farther into the sky. A soft melody began to play in my mind, and then I awoke, this time to sunlight. It was morning, a beam of light passing through the foggy window and onto my face. Looking around the room groggily, the cat that had scared the life out of me earlier was nowhere to be seen. Checking the alarm clock on my phone, I was relieved to see there was still plenty of time. I got dressed, brushed my teeth, and headed downstairs. Part of me wanted to explore the house farther, but the directions had been specific. At exactly 10 o'clock, I was to untie the balloon. Heading out the front door, I was surprised to see the vast body of water before me. It was strikingly similar to what I had seen in the dream. A chill went through me as I walked around its edges. I saw it then from a distance, the bright red balloon she had spoken of. I was relieved to see that it at least was different from the dream. Heading closer, I saw that it was already floating at eye level, the only thing stopping its ascension being a white rope that was tied neatly to a stake below. It suddenly struck me just how odd of a request this in fact was. A man I had never known dying by suicide, and then leaving me his entire fortune, which seemed formidable, in trade for doing one small favor after his death, releasing what I imagined was a very expensive red balloon that would carry his ashes up into the ether, and perhaps beyond. And how odd also that his investment was held so haphazardly to the ground below. I figured that even only a moderate amount of wind would have caused the stake to pull free from the ground, and the balloon would have been released far before I had the chance to do it myself. And why was it so important that I be the one to release his ashes anyway? I guess it didn't matter. People were crazy, and if one odd job was all I need do in return for such a fortune, then I would do it. The balloon itself was secured only a few feet from the rocky lake. As I placed my hand on its smooth edges, a cool breeze fell across water, and it began to snow for the first time that morning. Light snowflakes filled the air around me, their company seeming to silence the water on top of the mountain. I knelt down, untied the rope that had only contained a single knot, and felt the balloon's weight in my hand for the first time. It was really heavy. How could it be so heavy? It wasn't large by any means, and only contained my grandfather's ashes, for God's sake. Oh God, the clock. I forgot to check the time, I realized, as the balloon pulled up violently towards the sky above. Shit. And why is the pull of this thing so fucking strong? I tried to force it back down using my body weight, acting like a dog or cat that suddenly became dead weight to avoid a bath or visit to the vet. But it was no use. A gust of wind struck the thing again, and I fell forwards into the water just ahead. I watched the red colors float quickly up through the falling snow, higher and higher. Checking my watch, I saw that the time was 9:44. Close enough. It was just about the time of me losing sight of the balloon. that I noticed a drop of blood on my left hand. I must have cut it on the rope. And then there was a drop on my right hand, and then one on my forearm. Plop, plop. I looked back up towards the sky. Plop, plop, plop. At first I thought, no, I was sure that I was dreaming, or my eyes were just playing tricks on me. They were telling me that what was once only moments ago a fog of white falling gently from the sky was now replaced by a steady drip of dark red. It covered my arms now completely, and my vision seemed to be quickly becoming a mix of that color. "This way," a familiar voice said, as I pulled my eyes from what I was sure was blood covering my entire body, and up towards her voice. It was the woman from yesterday, her once dark hair now transformed into a flowing sea of red. Without saying a word, I followed her, around the home and through an iron gate behind. "Patentibus," she whispered. The gate opened slowly before her. Yes, I was surely dreaming. The woman I followed through the gate was now completely cloaked in red. The sight of her was magical and terrifying all at once. Yet there was something else that drew my attention away. We were in a graveyard, I realized. Yet that was not what pulled me so. It was the names on the graves. Stephen A. Walker, born September 3rd, 1840, died February 6th, 1907. Linda J. Walker, born January 9th, 1781, died December 21st, 1809. "They're all here," the woman added, pausing for a moment and looking back. The entire family I had never met was buried on this mountain. We walked for a few moments more before coming to the first fresh grave I had seen. Sure enough, William F. Walker, my grandfather. "What the hell is going on?" The beautiful woman replied nothing, only turning to the grave and speaking one word. "Consurgo." She knelt lower and kissed the tombstone sweetly. I watched in horror as the red liquid, of which I was sure was blood, began to fall more rapidly from the sky. Though terrified, I wasn't even all that surprised by that point, when a strong hand reached out from the stained grave and towards the sky above. And then another hand. The red woman extended her arms downwards and towards them. "No," I shouted. "Stop!" But it was too late, the cold hands clutching on and pulling strongly. She braced her feet against the tombstone as not to be dragged downwards into the earth herself. And that's when I saw him for the first time. William F. Walker. His stained red face popping out of the ground first, and then his torso, and then his legs. When he finally stepped up onto the ground before me, I watched as he took a deep breath and stared up at the sky. "You've done well," he said, paying no attention to the woman, and instead staring at me. I fell backwards in fear, my body trembling now, and my mind coming dangerously close to snapping. The red rain fell so hard now that I began to sink down into the earth myself. I began to scream as the ghastly figure walked closer and knelt down beside me. "It had to be a walker," he said, his head drifting up towards the sky and his mouth opening wide to drink. The last thing I remember was seeing my dead family claw their way up and out of the now red mud, and my grandfather's hand reaching down and taking mine. His eyes glowed a bright yellow that filled my heart with fear. yet I was mesmerized. I stared back into them as he spoke 5 words.
We have work to do.
A good human is a human who does not neglect the food bowl, reflected Poppy. And until quite recently, the old woman had been a quite good human indeed. In the previous months, however, she changed, and daily feedings became weekly feedings, which in turn became sporadic occasions with no rhyme or reason that the cat could decipher. Today, fortunately, the old woman filled the bowl with old beef and rice, and Poppy purred and rubbed against her leg to show his contentment. Perhaps if she understood his appreciation, she would not wait so long until next time. Poppy supposed he could survive without her help. Any good cat possesses many ways to find food, of course. But since he had lived alone with a woman for so many years, he felt a sort of renewed companionship with every meal she periodically gave him. More importantly, he preferred fresh human food to the stale meat he scavenged on his own. He watched the old woman putter around the table aimlessly and wondered what a human thought about all day. Noticed a cup on the table. Rose frowned. About half filled with water, the cup sat near the table's corner, and she could not recall placing it there. Michael had doubtlessly left it out. He always forgot his things around the house. She picked up the cup and placed it in the sink. She lifted the oil lamp to guide her way in the dark, and she slowly paced down the hallway. Her hip gave her a throbbing pain today, and she wished she could see a doctor about it. As she powered through her discomfort, she nearly stepped on the cat and shooed him away with the side of her foot. He scurried off into the shadows. Eventually, she found the pantry she sought out and grabbed a can of beans from the upper shelf, one of the few cans remaining. Carrying the can in one hand and the lamp in the other, she returned to the kitchen. Rose noticed some water on the table as she set the lamp down. With her sleeve, she wiped up the moisture, figuring it resulted from the moved cup's condensation. But after she found a can opener to open the beans, a droplet plopped down onto the table. The woman looked up, realizing the ceiling must have sprung. Left the cup on the table. Rose moved the mostly filled glass over to the sink. Michael must have forgotten about it at breakfast time. That was like Michael, to forget his drink out on the table. The oil lamp dimmed in her grasp, so she hobbled over to the closet to search for some more fuel to fill the lamp. She missed the days when the bunker's electric lights worked properly, but something must have happened to the generator. Rose would ask Michael to look at it later. Maybe he would be able to do something about the food supply too, as she began to grow concerned over the diminishing stocks. No use worrying about it, she told herself, and carefully poured fresh oil into the lamp, the sole source of light down beneath the ground. One day, Clara and Rose had laid out in the sunshine, having a picnic out in the grass. Rose had made a pair of sandwiches. She had filled her own with tuna and Clara's with turkey, since the young girl had never liked tuna much, and they had brought along a bag of fresh strawberries from the farmer's market. Clara set a strawberry in the dirt and watched the ants come to tear off morsels they could carry back to the colony. Rose missed feeling sun on her skin. Down underground, she stepped away from the closet, passing a jagged corner of the metal wall, upon which she had duct-taped a blanket to soften the sharp edge. Returning to the kitchen, she noticed water dripping onto the table. She looked up towards the ceiling and, not seeing anything, slowly climbed onto the table to claim a better view. Holding up the lamp and keeping her frail body balanced on the table, she examined the ceiling, not finding any crack or flaw the water could have escaped from. Frowning, she fetched the glass from the sink and set it below the drip to catch the water. Better than damaging the table, she thought. Michael can look at that too next time he's around. Or maybe he would be... Left a cup out. She picked the glass up, which looked mostly full of cola. Michael probably left it out after lunchtime. That was like Michael, to forget his drink out on the table. She dumped the contents down the drain and left the glass face down in the sink. Poppy meowed. Rose almost jumped, not expecting to see the skinny black cat watching her from the darkness. His eyes glowed golden in the lamplight, and he looked a bit like Maxine had. When Rose brought Maxine to the bunker so long ago, she had no idea of the litter of kittens that would soon follow. Cut off from the outside world, Maxine's descendants had grown inbred and sickly, and only Poppy remained. He meowed again. "I just fed you this morning. Don't be pushy." Looking bitter, the cat prowled off, disappearing into one of the thin vents. Clara would play with the cats in the vents, squeezing through the narrow spaces. But the vents had a pretty bad smell now. When Clara came over next time, she probably wouldn't like to play there, even if Poppy didn't seem to mind the odor. Rose would ask Michael to take a look once he had time. Once, her cat had smelled terrible, and Michael found a family of mice that had settled in the ventilation system with a secret supply of cat food they had stolen. He took care of it. Generally, Michael could fix most anything, although he never got the bunker clock ticking again. In the early years of their marriage, he would hide out in the garage working on engines and small appliances for some extra money. He treated her poorly in those days, generally neglecting her and disappearing for days on end. Still young and clueless, Rose thought all husbands behaved that way. But his behavior eventually wore her down all the same. She called her sister one night, packed her things, and left for the bus station. On the bus ride to school, Rose sat in the back seat with the other school children as the vehicle rattled down the dirt road. A girl named Paulina made fun of her, but Rose couldn't remember what she looked like. Embarrassed, Rose tried to ignore the bully. She drew in her notebook, sketching a castle in wonderful colors. Poppy meowed once more. "I just fed you. Don't go trying to trick me like that." Returning to the kitchen, she noticed a thin pool of a dark liquid on the table, dripping down from the ceiling. Rose climbed up on the table and noticed a layer of mildew that leaked steadily. After digging around for a towel, she scaled the table again despite her aged hip, and... doing there, she moved the cup of cold coffee off the table. Rose frowned, vaguely remembering Michael telling her that they had run out of coffee years ago. He must have found some more. Silly man, leaving his drink out after breakfast. As she moved the cup to the sink, she scrunched up her nose. What stank? Rose went downstairs to the lower level of the bunker, stopping by the patch of soft dirt in the corner of the room. Originally, Michael had planned to dig out through that soft patch, and had spent weeks tearing up the concrete floor with a metal length of pipe. He said he could have made short work of it with a sledgehammer. Rose wondered how he planned to dig his way out without a shovel, but that day never came anyways. Michael rarely planned far ahead. When they had Wesley, He lost his job for missing work because he hadn't thought to tell his employers at the garage he would be out for the day. Before Wesley could speak, he used to spend all day coloring and drawing, and Rose could hardly call herself surprised when he earned a spot in art school. He turned down the scholarship and became an architect instead, on Michael's behest. Although Rose always thought their boy would have lived happier as an artist. Wesley seemed pleased with his decision, however, and met a beautiful girl at university. They had a daughter of their own not too long after, Clara. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Rose and Michael watched Clara during the summer while her parents worked. What day was today? Rose hoped Clara would come by tomorrow. The analog clock read 2:15, as it had for an unknowable stretch of time. With no way of discerning day from night, Rose simply slept when she grew tired and ate when hungry, and she had long since lost track of the calendar. Michael had initially scratched tallies down in a notebook somewhere, but eventually that grew more disheartening than helpful. They gave the pages to Clara so she could sketch to entertain herself. Holding her lamp ahead, she strolled to the bathroom. She passed by the sharp corner of the wall that she had taped a blanket over to cushion. The pipes rattled when she flushed the toilet, and the water had a rusty red tinge to it. Ignoring the sight, she washed her hands in the small sink, the sound of running water echoing through the spacious bunker. Living like this for however many years came with an indescribable loneliness. But Rose rarely remembered she was alone anyways, so it didn't matter much. A moment of clarity came to her then, and she stared into the dark emptiness of the bunker. The stale air stirred gently from the vents. She could hear the fans buzzing. That sounded wrong, so she would have to remind herself to ask Michael to take a look at the ventilation later. Generally, Michael could fix most anything. She turned the lamp off and returned to the kitchen in the dark. Hearing the gentle tap of dripping water, she flicked the lamp back to life, spying a dark liquid settling into a pool on the table. Fearing damage to the wooden surface, Rose hurried to find a towel and wiped out a mess before setting out a cup to collect the leaking water. Looking at the towel, she found it stained a black with the slightest tinge of red. She examined the ceiling to find it covered in black mold. The liquid dripped from the mass of fungus. How could she clean that up? Maybe some... There. It looked filled to the brim with ink. She dumped the cup out in the toilet, not wanting to stain the sink. Why would Michael have left a cup of ink out? Clara must have done some painting earlier and used the glass to clean her brushes. Unlike her to forget her art supplies on the counter, though. Wesley would have chided her for such forgetful behavior. Poppy sniffed at the oil lamp, cuddling up against its warmth. Rose missed the days where she didn't have to rely on the lamp, where she could just flip up the switch and expect the bulbs to light up the bunker. One day they stopped working, and no matter how long Michael toyed with the generator, the electricity refused to flow. Light became another resource to conserve, and they spent the days in darkness unless absolutely necessary. Now, Rose realized the remaining fuel would likely outlive her, so she began to burn freely. The light reminded her of the gas stove in the house, and she recalled making a turkey supper for Thanksgiving when Michael's family came over. Rose had never baked a turkey before and dried it out to a crisp, so Michael's mother had thrown her portion away. Not even making it to the pumpkin pie, Rose excused herself to cry in the bathroom. The cat licked itself in the lamp's flickering glow. Throughout the day, she would clean up after the cat whenever it decided to relieve itself. Rose had nothing to use as litter down in the bunker, so there didn't seem much of an alternative. The woman missed the fresh air and smell of their home on the surface. Michael and Rose looked at the house only once before they made an offer. The widow who owned the place told them about her husband, who had returned shell-shocked from the war and put together a fallout shelter beneath the hillside. They hadn't understood the amount of work the veteran had put into assembling the bunker, huge enough to house his entire family indefinitely in event of crisis, as long as needed. Rose remembered Michael checking out the bunker after they moved in and how he returned to her awestruck by the scale of the underground shelter. Despite its size, the bunker began to feel small by the second day below ground. At times it became terrifyingly cramped, and with Rose, Michael, Clara, and Maxine all shut away, they constantly found themselves stepping on each other's toes. The smell of human odor overtook the small space. Still, Clara smiled, and she retained her positivity right up until the end. Rose shuddered to think when Clara's cut festered and the infection grew. The girl contorted as the muscle spasms worsened. She would wail in pain, and neither Rose nor Michael could do anything for her. The veteran who built the bunker must have put antibiotics somewhere, and Rose and her husband scoured the place day and night. They found nothing. Clara's fever overtook her, and Michael buried her in the soft patch of soil in the lowest level of the bunker. Wordlessly, they set a crucifix into the dirt, held each other tight, and sobbed. The first time he held her had been in the dance hall where they met. Rose's parents set her up with a date, and she refused to go until her dad bribed her with the new dress she wanted. With 4 years between them, Michael seemed a proper adult. He made Rose feel childish, but he clearly fancied her anyways. Nobody had ever paid attention to her before. She felt so safe when he wrapped his arm around her. Rose had known so little then. When Christmas came to the fallout shelter, back when they still kept track of the days and couldn't have marked more than a few dozen, the family gathered around the table and ate the same rations as usual, but Rose encouraged them to sing a few carols. Her husband hated to sing, but Clara convinced him to join in. Black liquid settled on the table beside the cat, who showed no recognition of it. Rose frowned at the leak and quickly set out a cup to collect the drip. How didn't Poppy notice it? Observing how quickly the cup filled, she thought better of it and replaced the cup with a bowl. She would need to get her husband to look at it. She couldn't seem to retrieve his name. Funny that it should... Was that? A bowl of black slime sat out on the table, and Rose turned her nose up at it. Grease, maybe. She scraped it out into the trash. Where did Michael go? She hadn't seen him for days now. He must have gone to visit his mother. She placed the bowl back, and it collected fluid that dripped from the ceiling. Worrying that the liquid might ruin the bowl, she replaced it with some cheap Tupperware. Rose noticed some greasy stains on the wood beneath the bowl and decided to move the whole table to avoid damaging it. Her hip hurt, but she managed to push the table out of the way anyways. She placed the Tupperware on the floor to collect. The table gone? Rose noticed the table pushed to the other side of the kitchen and frowned. Why would Michael have moved the table? She almost tripped on the Tupperware container in the center of the floor, and she set down the lamp to see its pitch-black contents. Michael, Rose, and Clara all stared at the emergency announcement that had interrupted their show. Clara began to cry, and Michael said they needed to grab essentials. Civil alert sirens blared in the distance. As Clara collected the toys and clothes she deemed vital, Michael raided the pantry for fresh food, and Rose herded Maxine into a box and grabbed his cat food. They raced down the hill to the bunker while Rose looked upwards, half expecting to see the sky crashing down. "Don't complain, Maxine," Rose said to Poppy as he meowed at her, and she glanced at the thin black cat. But it looked very different now. For the last few days, the cat would moan at the vents, like it wanted to alert Rose to something there. It stopped without reason. After they entered the bunker, the ground shook, and the door refused to open. Rose sat at the bus station, prepared to leave her marriage for good, but a car came roaring up. She didn't know what to say when Michael tumbled out from the driver's seat, entirely out of breath, and he knelt before her and begged for forgiveness. Many times before, he had apologized and promised to change. Rose told him she had to go, told him that she hadn't understood what marrying him meant, and she boarded the bus. She stayed with her sister, and every day Michael called. Her sister kept telling her to ignore him because nobody ever really changed, but after 4 months of waiting by the phone for their daily chat, she finally returned. He doted on her. He listened to her. He defended her from his mother when she snipped. Rose had never been happier. Clara ran into the sharp edge a few months after they moved into the bunker. The cut didn't look so bad, and Michael and Rose washed it out and wrapped the whole area in gauze. It didn't seem like a big deal. Just to be safe, Rose duct taped a blanket over the sharp edge to prevent another accident. Rose looked at the ceiling and saw black fluid pouring down from a lump. The concrete bulged and warped as though under incredible pressure. It dropped down, soaked black, ready to burst, and... Around the bunker, Rose hadn't realized where the oil on the floor had come from. The food had run out that morning. Wesley? She found a mop and tried to clean. Grime seemed to pour from the walls, dripping down from above. Rose wanted to turn on the lamp to assess the damage, but Michael says they need to conserve oil since they might be down in the shelter for a while. The sound of the dripping came from the kitchen, where she supposed Clara hadn't fully shut off the faucet. Rose knew better than to waste water, so she followed the noise. A stench nearly knocked her off her feet. She quickly grabbed the lamp but couldn't find a match until she had dug through every shelf of the closet. When she actually found one, her shaky fingers struggled to hold it, but she managed to clutch the match tight enough to ignite it by gripping it between her middle and pointer finger. Finally lit, the lamp cast off a dim glow. Rose held the light source and lumbered back to the kitchen. Her hip began to hurt. A vaguely humanoid shape hung upside down from above, stretching from the concrete ceiling and dripping sludge to the floor. Rose could barely see it in the thin light, and she noticed Poppy sitting in the corner of the kitchen. The cat showed no reaction to the thing. Poppy couldn't see it at all. Not surprising, since the figure had come for her. Rose came closer, and the growth shifted towards her. It wore someone's face. She knew the face belonged to someone important, but she couldn't recognize it at all. A limb extended from the mass, and it caressed her. Leaning close, she could feel its wet breath against her features, and everything came apart at the... Poppy licked water from a pipe in the corner of the lowest level. He had spotted a mouse once many weeks back, but he hadn't seen any vermin for some time. Worse yet, the rest of his food had spoiled beyond usage. As hunger gnawed at the cat, Poppy visited the human. He stopped by occasionally to check up on her, but she just sat in the corner of the kitchen, entirely immobile. He rubbed up against her leg, but she refused to acknowledge him. Typical. Hopping up on her lap, he pressed into her, missing the days she would make light. He tried biting her, but she still wouldn't react. Poppy wondered what had happened to the good human who used to feed him so diligently. The cat licked itself. No matter. He could still find use for her. I've been in the mood to read something that truly scares me. That's pretty rare. I'm not a person who scares easily. It's possible that some modern writers are told to dial it back when they write scary books, because who knows? A kid could be reading them. I don't know, but I do know that I've been feeling the lack of genuine scares lately. So I went to my local used bookstore and browsed the shelves in their horror section. I like used bookstores because they usually have much larger horror sections than a chain store might, and they definitely have a lot of older stuff there. Stuff you will never see on bookshelves in modern bookstores anywhere ever again. I happened upon this book almost by mistake. It was one of the last ones on the shelf, and it was shoved behind some others, almost like the store wanted to hide it. One look at it and I knew it was old. Quite possibly a first edition. The book was clearly first published long ago, and this one had been well loved. Its pages were yellowed, dog-eared all over the place. The cover was peeling up and near to falling off. Actually, the cover was what caused me to pick it up. There was a precious little description on it. Other than its title and the author's name, the front contained no information, and on the book cover there was simply a Yeats quote. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle, and what rough beast its hours come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. That poem always gives me the shivers, and I was impressed by the decision to put it on the back. The first page had an excerpt, and it seemed to be about a farmer and his haunted scarecrow. That really didn't sound too horrifying, but if the cover made me pick it up, the quote is what made me take it to the cashier. At worst, I would have wasted $5. At best, I might have a genuine undiscovered classic on my hands. The cover of the book made it feel both ancient and timeless. It was very simplistic, but it evoked something in me, some primal feeling that I found impossible to ignore. I might be making too much out of it, but I got a sense of foreboding looking at that cover. Modern novels tend to go all out and create an image of a monster that might be found in a special effects-laden, big-budget horror schlock fest designed to do little more than get teenagers in the seats. This cover was far more minimalist, but conveyed more of a sense of unease in me than a million Killer Scarecrow movies ever could. So I picked it up and I brought it home. I'm only a few pages in, but already starting to feel like I've made a mistake. I've never heard of R. Scabry before, but from the first few pages, he doesn't strike me as much of a writer. He goes pretty light on the scares, and when he does try and scare you, he uses a torrent of cliches that I doubt would scare a 5-year-old. I'm being a little more forgiving, though, because the book isn't very long, and it's not unlikely that these cliches weren't cliches at all when Scabry was writing them. Hell, he might have intended some of them. The story, believe it or not, spends surprisingly little time out on the farm, or anywhere near the titular scarecrow. It's actually strangely political. Mostly about this 50-ish farmer named Fenton McCall and his tireless efforts to throw the local farmers union rep out of the town, because he doesn't feel that they'll be fair to the workers. At least that's mainly what it's about in the first 3 chapters. The only time the scarecrow itself makes an appearance is at the end of chapter 1, wherein McCall has just finished setting it up, and thinks to himself that it's a mighty fine scarecrow. That's literally all the scarecrow action we've gotten thus far. There was one scene that was slightly unsettling, wherein McCall, who has been depicted as a stern but loving husband, snaps at his wife when she asks about the assembly meeting he's just come home from. Just that one part, that's all that's gotten under my skin. And even then, it was less about the out-of-character behavior, and more just a sense that scene gave me that not all is well. Update. As it turns out, I was right about the scene being meant as unsettling. It's becoming clear as I read that Fenton McCall is slowly losing his mind. That's kind of more like a horror story, but still not particularly frightening. What does it have to do with the scarecrow, you ask? Well, as McCall's madness grows, he begins to imagine the scarecrow talking to him and following him as he does his work on the farm. It whispers horrific ideas, or at least ideas that Scabry clearly hopes you'll find horrific, in his mind about murdering his nagging wife and burning down the town assembly hall at the next meeting. However, there was one thing I wasn't prepared for. The book is illustrated. I'm not kidding. I don't know how I missed that when I flipped through the book at the store, but there it is. The art is something special, not at all in tune with the rather boring book. I flipped to the incredibly sparse credits page and could not find mention of an artist, except the one for the cover image, and he clearly isn't the guy who made the illustrations on the inside. His style is very vivid, even if it's also simplistic. His drawings look almost like photographs, except blurry, or with eyes shown as glowing holes. I've scanned in the first image, which I trust you will agree is rather strange looking. That's literally supposed to be McCall and his wife. Yeah, I don't get it either. There's nothing scary about this scene in the book. They're just walking home from church and discussing the union leader. But this is how our illustrator chooses to convey that scene. If the book itself were 1/10 as frightening as that picture, I'd probably give it a much more favorable review than I have so far. I know that some of you might think the image is cheesy looking. Okay, I'll grant you that even looking at it here on my computer, it looks way less intense. But there's something about looking at it from the page itself that I can't even begin to describe. A feeling like they're looking at me. Maybe I just stayed up too late reading. Update. Taking a break from reading this damn book today. It's starting to get to me. Not Scabry's writing, it still sucks. But just I can't really explain it. There's more pictures in the book than I realized. I'm not going to upload any more of them for now because I'm having a hard time bringing myself to look at them. It's not so much what's in them as what feels like is there behind them. Whatever it is, I don't like it. I'll say this, the story has taken a strange turn. It's still barely talked about, but Scabry at one point has the Scarecrow, while talking to McCall, make mention of they, as if he has someone he's reporting to behind the scenes. I don't want to dig out that passage right now, because when I read it, it gave me a chill. There was a picture on the next page, and somehow I knew that they, whoever they are, were in the picture. It only showed two young girls, but I could sense them in the picture just the same. That's enough of that. I sound paranoid or something. It's really not as bad as I'm making it sound. Not really. I decided to Google our Scabry today, see if there's anything else he's written. Literally only 3 hits came up. I'm pretty sure I would get more hits if I Googled my own name. The first hit was a used book site that had once been selling Scarecrow, but it was out of stock and the site looked like it hadn't been updated in years. The second hit was a dead link, which was too bad because it looked like it might contain the most actual info about the book. Maybe it would even tell me who did the artwork within the book. The final hit was a pure black page, and the wait circle kept spinning in the center as if it were loading a video or something. I waited for nearly 10 minutes, and while no video loaded, I could swear I heard whispers coming out of my speakers. They were low, and I could never make out what they were saying, but I could hear them, even as the circle kept spinning. Now, here's where things get weird. I went back to the search page later on because I was going to try and let that page sit there as long as it took to load, but the hit wasn't there anymore. The first 2 useless links still were, but not the last one, which was the only one that I seemed to get any kind of result from, even one so unsatisfactory as a blank page attempting to load a video. So instead, I Googled the name of the publishing house that printed the book, Margrave Press. I got tons of hits, but when I put the name in quotes, only 2 pages of hits loaded, and only 1 hit seemed to have anything to do with a publishing company. It makes a brief mention of a guy named Tom Harkey, who worked as a copy editor at Margrave Press for a short while in the 60s, before leaving for Bantam when Margrave went under. I Googled Tom Harkey, who has his own page with contact info, and so I sent him a short email. It went like this. Dear Mr. Harkey, I recently picked up an older, used book that was published by a now defunct publishing house that you worked at until it closed. Do you remember much about your time at Margrave Press? If you do, I hope you can give me some information about a writer named R. Scabry, who wrote the book I'm reading. It's a horror novel called Scarecrow. Specifically, I'd like to know who it was who contributed the in-book artwork for the book, as it's very well done. But I can't seem to find the name of the artist, and online info doesn't seem to help either. Any help you can offer on this would be greatly appreciated. I also decided to Google Wesley Childs, the artist who did the work for the front cover. He also has a website, but nowhere on it did I see the simple yet evocative picture he had done for Scarecrow. In fact, nothing he had up on his website looked much like that. We'll see if I ever hear back from either of them. Update. Well, I am almost halfway through the book now. I decided to keep reading despite any misgivings I felt the other day. Scabry's skills with prose and dialogue haven't improved, but the story has taken a much darker turn. I guess I understand a little better why Yates' The Second Coming was used as a quote now. As McCall's madness grows, the more he starts speaking in poetic gloom and doom language, like the poem. He even quotes it a few times. At one point, he screams at the man leading the town assembly meeting that The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. He turns murderous later, and finally kills a fellow farmer, one that was the most outspoken that the union should be formed. And just before slitting his throat, hisses at him that things fall apart, the center cannot hold. My first reaction to this usage of the poem is to say bullshit. Because honestly, it's like Scabry just liked the poem and thought it sounded scary, so he decided his murderous farmer would start spouting passages of it. There's no clue elsewhere that he's the kind of man who would even read Yeats. However, there is an apocalyptic tone to the poem, and the Scarecrow has an apocalyptic tone when he speaks to McCall. He warns him that the tide is turning, and soon all innocence will be drowned, which also comes from the Second Coming. Somehow Scabry's able to make the lines sound like the Scarecrow came up with them. Maybe he's not as bad a writer as I thought. Also, those pictures keep appearing. I swear earlier today I flipped ahead 5 or 6 pages to see when this chapter would be over, and there weren't any pictures. Just now I flipped to the 3rd page, and I was greeted by this. I mean, what the hell is that? It has nothing, literally nothing to do with the story. And I could swear it wasn't there earlier today. Much like the others. Those eyes, man. I want it to be just my imagination, but I swear they're looking at me. And seeing me. Writing it down like that, it feels stupid. But all I can say is read this damn thing for yourself and tell me it doesn't creep you out. Update. Heard back from Wesley Childs today. He says he only barely remembers making that drawing. The dude is something like 80 now, and he was commissioned for that piece in the early 60s. He said he's never read the book himself, and that he only remembers the painting when I emailed him. He seems surprised that anyone is reading this book in the modern age, because according to him, they only printed a handful of copies. He wasn't sure how many. He was not aware that anyone was hired to do in-book artwork, or even that there was any. That inspired me to try and get a hold of Tom Harkey again. I decided it had been long enough that I should have at least gotten a formal response. So I sent a quick email to him asking if he'd had time to consider my request. Almost immediately, and I mean like 5 minutes after I hit send, I received this from what I guess is one of his staffers. Do not attempt to contact us again. We are blocking your email and your IP address. Farther attempts at contact will be considered harassment and will be dealt with by the proper authorities. Whoa, I wasn't expecting that. I mean, I waited a week between emails and I was pretty polite both times. I'm trying not to read too much into that. I went back to the book today, still not sure if I had the constitution to keep reading it. I don't want to see those pictures again. I don't want to feel them looking at me. The Scarecrow is not actually speaking to McCall, but it's clear that something is. Every time there's a mention of them, the next page has a photo of those strange, silhouetted people, and I have to believe it's just the way the artist had with his work that makes me sure that something is watching me from behind those pictures. Update. Okay, I'm sorry for the tone my review as I go read has taken. I am trying very hard not to let my concerns show in my posts, but it's slipping through. I haven't had the strength to pick up the book since the last time I wrote. I got worse after receiving a second email from Wesley Childs. He apologized for lying to me and told me that the reason he didn't remember the Scarecrow painting is that he had purposely tried to forget it. According to him, as he was painting it, he kept hearing whispering. And once it was completed, he could swear it was coming to life and talking to him through his dreams. He mailed it as soon as he could and spent days after that trying to get rid of the feeling of being watched or believing that he heard whispers. He says he's never made a painting like that before and never has been able to again. It was the first and last work he did for Margrave Press. He also told me that he met R. Scabry, but only once, and that it was just a pen name. Unfortunately, he doesn't remember what the man's real name was. He said Scabry was a small man who seemed nervous all the time. I wrote back and asked him why he thinks Tom Harkey would wish to block me and threaten me with the authorities just for asking about this book. He replied just a few minutes ago to tell me that Harkey has been asked a couple of times before during Q&A sessions about his time at Margrave, and anytime he is asked, he immediately concludes the session and walks out. He won't talk to anyone about Margrave. Childs himself once tried to reach any other contacts that commissioned him for the cover art, but he found none. It's as if Margrave Press never existed, other than its tenuous connection to one man. Update. It's been another week. Woke up this morning to an email from Tom Harkey in my inbox. It wasn't the website address. It looked more like an account for personal use. It said only this: if you have that goddamn book in your house, burn it. I haven't burnt it. It's on my coffee table right now. I can barely bring myself to look at it. Whatever is seeing me through the book can now see me even when it's closed. I have a feeling it's the rough beast moving its slow thighs, slouching towards Bethlehem. Maybe that beast inspired the great poet William Butler Yeats to write about it, and just over 40 years later inspired a hack writer who called himself R. Scabry to do the same. I don't know. I don't care anymore. I just wanted to stop talking to me. Update. I tried to burn it. I did. I used kitchen tongs and took it out to my backyard. I dropped it in an old steel bucket and struck a match. Then I held it there. I waited. I couldn't drop the match. Something was going to make sure that if I burned the book, I would feel every flame the book did tenfold. I put the match out and left the book in the bucket. I'm not going back for it. Update. I've nearly finished the book. There have been no pictures for the last several pages. There don't need to be any. They tell me what has already been happening. They tell me what is going to happen. They see me through the words I read.